Tashi Dele, hello everyone. My name is Yimso Ki. I work with Studio Nyandak Architecture and Engineering. Thank you all so much for joining us for this two-day conference hosted in collaboration with the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives. Our talk today will focus on architectural heritage in Tibet and the Himalaya. So we'll start with our first two speakers, Dr. Ingun B. Amundsen and Dr. John Harrison, and they will be followed by a short Q&A session, and then our last two speakers, Dr. Karl Rajavec and Studio Nyandak, will also be followed by a Q&A session. I'm honored to now introduce Dr. Geshe Lakdorla, the Director of the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, who will be saying a few words of welcome for our speakers today.
I would like to welcome our speakers for today as well as for tomorrow. I'll have time to introduce tomorrow's speakers also. But I'm really not so much about introducing the speakers, which you will do probably, or otherwise also it's all written here. I just wanted to welcome all of you and to say how happy we are that such a group of eminent experience and scholarship on Tibetan architect and earthquake. These two are very closely related. I'm not going to make a long speech here. I really wanted to say that library in the very initial stage, we also had a small section about Tibetan architect. Rumi Khosalaji, who is here, also knows about that. Tashila, who is here, also knows about that. But then in 2006, again we invited a team from San Francisco, Geohazard International, and with the support of Geohazard International branch in New Delhi, Mr. Hari Kumar, with whom we are still working. And after that, the team wrote almost like 30-page write-up about their finding in the library, in the temple, TCV, and the places around. And there were a number of small things that we could immediately do, which I did. For example, the library the main building used to have slate parapets, which if falls down will cut the head of several people. So I learned that from that training. So immediately I removed all those. Now you will not see those dangerous parapets there. Then also in the proper library museum, they used to burn butter lamps. So these days you can use electric lamps, so no need to have real fire, which is again, during an earthquake, it's really not so much just the collapse of building, but many other things, which I don't want to say right now because you will have lots of things to learn tomorrow. And then another thing that I wanted to just mention, probably in Tibetan, or maybe continue in English, I don't know. Probably I want to say this in Tibetan. Architect is, of course, very important. The blending of the traditional process of building and the modern ways of building, especially fortifying and things like that, is extremely important. But more than that, the urgent thing is the earthquake in Himachal and especially in Dharamsala. It may be applicable to other places also. Most of the people don't even know. Dharamsala di sayum gi nyenga chimbu shivuchik la de dewa di hingi koran ayo na samarash. Rwa chik tung gubja thug marwe. Nga la Dharamsala sayum chimbu shivuchik jabche ne. Tudu chitanche na mimbur shida yosamare. Yine ya miti nyi lasa chik shidwa. 다 단다 군족이 사용 딱지 개발속에 응원다 나로 제용나 any the sagu de kora zone number earthquake zone number 5 or 6 pires any page the Himalayan goal tadi dikoto energy sa shajo di tensamarani kujota ta energy de mango sa yu kujota ngorwa tindechi kujo shukchim botang kaptu chigla phaje rector skill doing ge go tegas yugres labgdwa 시리 다 초징네 디 현황랑 등 서로 지금 초징네 내가 저 전화치 백 개심 버렸음 거 가야서는 가서 배배 취 숭접 제거래 리흉 숭접 제거래 미릭 숭접 제거래 다 망고 희부지 해거래 와 대숭접 제거에 미릭 바라강 락버드 다람살아 잠고르미 교사래 배미딩주 착사래 생강 계좌 상만대 요래 근데 요대서디 사용다 nge namdo lang geja dili ke mare nguye ne su geja re tinde sayum duksha ji jab chene yugden chigla ta nga zu keji ki minare changwe re kari na meba cha misi ba marwa tinde je cha wa chena ta khawal leus chaza dusu ri de nga zu thana chi pe masi ki kechi mo re nga zu mang cha gi chi de cha chen do ji chi ba ra ji chene BA ji thön MA ji thön tinde computer dang la de yigi se ge ti de chang chang ma do ge tile par ge ne ane meri sungjob chidang thone thone inare sayum gi nyenga thone sungjob che inare chulo gi nyenga inare yeyon la te chen nyenga khardo tan sungjob che ituzo nayam de inare ka dusul le thona che de te se chi pajen dang gi chune kor dang ma do tene de ngoma nga zu de samlo khone de nyam hip chig da songdu ji so che yore ane tring tanda ta nyandra la khunzu gi sokwa de tingoma kunzu de chawane chene pinzu khang de yangse pinzu khanyam de ngonzen dewa chene pinzu kodura che ta tring ngosu de keba de mangboje de hyun che to de gogo ya go shiu chi chung sung sam go 제자 단정의 공도 희원나 해네 그 사용 된데 누구자 중나 강반 로가 찍고 그 뒤에 좀 말해 매쇼리에다 되네 배다 다 사자 가실래는 나 줄로 쇼리에 된대 요래 되면은 아니 그래서 그랬지 사용 누구자 된데 쇼 엔데 사회 통해 매바지 냐고도 로지 망고시에요 어두서릭 데다 이게 망고시 되는 쇼스면도 사용 거디다 상이래 드링다 베베게 강수 거드래 베베 강수 거디나야 그 최다 리흉 그찬에 베베 강바 소다 투모 많이 바지 요래 남히게 사랑다 토면다 된들 때는 강바 잡다 강가가 요래 그래서 망고지야 별랑로 섬로다 그런 엄하게 수준 그도서는 로지 랭고에 망고 요래 다이는 그래서 망고지야 그 텔링 그찬에 제나 베나다 별로다 세용 잡는 강바 망고식네 강의 중송아 미망고 시송아 어떤데 섬로다 그래서 야 땡도 당이게 등상게 투지 망고 다 답라 망고 배줘 당 여러와 어떤데 아니 코란서 단 나올 표기 찍 나올 sabda 소케 와제네 sabda ngoma 찍 되어서래 다 단다 감조가 sabda 찍 손에 내려요래 대시도 대 가산다 드링데 페요님에 관시돼 베미팅조기 단다 sabda 소에 레시지요래 딜레가 증에서 바지 펩도나 야구도 생에 렌지 가서 고인다 펩도가 야구 좀 저랑서 믹스 강게 되는 에너지도 동원에 저어데 고고 용식으로 와 어딘데 제네 계산디 단다 대가 양성 지교래 지도 내게 제 망고 시고에면도 콩나버스 가면 난 그래 콩나버스 가면 나면 지부만 봐 남주네 뜻을 걸어 더 나시네 애는 알아서게 지금 송접 시에 가르가르 치해도 되네 락렌 따르고 개체 모두 삼거도 어떤데 저 툴을 하러나 so thank you so much once again for coming all the way and I'm all ears thank you.
Our first speaker today will be Dr. Ingun Brusklin Armanson, an architect and scholar who studies sacred architecture in the Himalaya. With decades of experience, particularly in Bhutan, Dr. Amundsen has long explored evolving intersections between tradition, environmental adaptation, and cultural identity in Himalayan architecture. In today's talk, Dr. Amundsen will reflect on how sacred architecture in the Himalaya has continuously adapted to new materials, seismic risk, and social change. She'll also introduce Studio Nyandak's ongoing work in Zanskar, where she has been working closely in the research and documentation of Buddhist monasteries and nunneries.
Hello? Oh, that was different. So nice to see so many here, and especially scholars who I've been fortunate to build my knowledge on. Romy Kosla, especially John Harrison's work. Matthew, I read your books. Yeah. So thank you for inviting me. And I'm so pleased to be a part of the Nyandak team and to be able to join your project in Sanskar. So now I'm going to tell more about my PhD and also the work we do in Sanskar. So first, here is our team. When we set off, when we arrived in Sanskar, we were very well received by monks from Kanchi and got scarves, as you see, very nicely. I felt very proud being honored by a yellow one. And the project, the outline here is also that one of the aims is actually to find out the interaction between buildings and people's beliefs and lives. What do these buildings mean for people? How are they being used? And also, of course, in order to do that work, we document buildings, and we are also registering, talking with people, finding out what are their future needs. And just a few words about myself. I was fortunate to live and work as an architect in Bhutan for more than 10 years. And my children grew up in Bhutan. And it was very nice to be a family there, to actually get to know the society in another way than when you just arrive as an expert and deliver a piece of work and go away. We stayed on, and I feel that Bhutan is my second motherland. And many of you may know that there has been hostilities between Tibet and Bhutan through the history. But the foreign minister said to me, yes, there were hostilities, but most love. So I'm going to elaborate a bit on this because it also reflected in the architecture. So when it's reflected in the architecture is, of course, also especially in the Tsong buildings, which developed in Bhutan. So in Bhutan, they have their most important temples and the biggest monk bodies are living in fortress-like buildings, and when they also have the administration of what is called the Tsongkhag, which is quite like counties, many other places. So it's both administration and the most important temples. And they were built from the 1620s onwards, and they are still building new Tsongs. So this is a living typology in Bhutan. I was lucky to get a grant by the Oslo School of Architecture. I was also very fortunate to get a research permit for Tibet, which was really unusual. But the four Norwegian universities had managed to get an agreement of cooperation between the Tibetan Academy of Social Sciences. So I went to Tibet in 1996 in the context of my PhD, because I wanted to have a comparison. I wanted to compare Bhutanese and Tibetan architecture. And I think we all know that Tibet is an occupied country today. The Tibetans are not in charge of their own country, and sacredness is really rare. So I think the fact that this Tibetan Buddhist culture is alive with an unbroken lineage to the past in Bhutan is an asset for the whole Tibetan-speaking world and the Himalayas. So I will go more into this. I was especially interested in looking at not only the usual 3 dimensions of architecture defining space, I also added the 4th dimension, which is time, and also most important, illustrated by this man standing there, that you see that how are actually humans' interactions with space and time. And that also include sacredness. What does these buildings mean for people? Because what I experienced in Bhutan was that because for a Western eye would be decorations around windows and doors and things, for a Bhutanese, for a religious person, this is also religious symbols. There are lotuses, there are endless knots, you have all these symbols which are sort of protecting you. So, well, Bhutan, sort of the 4th king of Bhutan, yeah, to a large extent, I think he invented the term gross national happiness, which you might have heard. And the point with the gross national happiness is that the happiness of a people, there is much more important, many other things than just economy is really important for happiness. You have to have a holistic approach to people's lives. What are their social, economic traditions? How are their lives, actually? So now this has become a global thing, and my country has even become, Norway has come on the top of that list, actually, when it comes to gross national happiness. But it came from Bhutan in the very beginning. But sacredness is important, and again, being a foreigner, this was very much like a closed book for me. Of course, I learned something about the architecture, but I wanted to go more in depth, because when it comes to the sacredness of buildings, also in the Tantric Buddhist tradition, you have esoteric meanings embedded in the architecture, which gives importance to buildings in different ways. So I was very lucky to get 2 distinguished Bhutanese scholars, Khenpo Phirchotashi, an Nyingmapa scholar, and also Shinkar Lam, who he was actually the first speaker in the Bhutanese assembly, and he also took part in the rebuilding of the songs. Of the Thimphu song, Tashichu song in the 1960s. So he's really very knowledgeable. So my PhD is nearly 100 pages of just transcriptions of my interviews with those 2 fellows. What you see below there, below the picture of me and Dr. Shinkar Lam, is the Kalachakra mandala in Potala Palace, which I could photograph when I was there in '96. And the understanding I got is that the mandala is the ultimate, most sacred type of a building. You know. The mandala is the ideal for a sacred building, and Samye Monastery is following the mandala typology very well, which I will tell more about later. And sacredness, one thing is the sacredness embedded in the buildings, but you also have rituals connected to the architecture. And for instance, when you want to build, you ask the earth goddess, Sai Lamu, first for permission to build. And an astrologer finds an appropriate date for the ceremony, and you start digging, under the left arm of the goddess. You see it on the drawings there, close to the heart. And you study, you start digging, and you see how what you see down in the earth, this is a good place to dig, to build, and then the permission is actually granted and you can start. And these kind of rituals are also followed up during the whole construction period, and then a consecration in the end. And one thing is that, of course, these rituals are very important, especially with chortens and sculptures, songs, temples. But it's also important in people's houses. But again, it's levels of understanding. And again, I showed you the two lamas in the previous picture. And when talking with them, I got also their more scholarly information about the sacredness and architecture. Of course, this understanding goes on many levels, from the Lama down to carpenters and people in general. And I'm also thinking that as long as we maintain the rituals in the architecture, we talk about the sacred architecture, and we may maybe even talk about the tantric architecture, because the rituals are a way to display in micro life what you want to happen in the bigger life. So rituals are important in influencing the larger world. And one thing is like the Sai Lamo consecration you see here. To the right, you also see that in these Bhutanese songs, these photographs are from Punakat songs. There are also rituals of national importance, where you see on the Utse, the main temple building in the song, they display for one day a huge tanka here of Shabram Rinpoche, and people actually does a circumambulation under this huge tanka as a part of the rituals in the songs. So songs are important. Songs are important, yes, but rituals are really very important also. And then it's not just the buildings, it's also the landscapes, the geography. Carl is going to tell us more about geography later, but I wanted to say something about geography, because the topography of landscapes also have different meanings. To the right, you see Dumse Lakang in Paro, built by Tangtong Gyalpo in the 15th, or now I'm the 14th century to be correct. And it's a very interesting temple, because it's built in the shape of a chorten, and with the rooms inside, etc. So it's a very special. It's the only one like that in Bhutan. I lost. Oh, there we are again. Hi. And to the left, you see Chimilakang, which is in the Punakha Valley, which is a credit to Drukpa Kinley. He's called the madman, the religious madman, Drukpa Kinley. And he is known for fertility. And in this Chimilakang, there are lots of penises. And then sort of women who have problems conceiving, they come to, it's not only the Bhutanese, it's globally women are actually coming there, circumambulating and hoping to improve their fertility. And also the whole hill is a key spot. And you see also that Dumse Lakang is built in a sacred site with lots of power. And then, you know, we lived these 10 years, as I said, in Bhutan, and we lived for 10 years without television. This was 87. Television came after 2000, I think. We had hardly radio. I really spent those years reading very much. So when I came to Tibet in 96, I had read a lot about Lhasa. And you see here, you see Potala Palace on Marpuri from Chakpuri, the medicinal Lakang Institute. And somehow, stupid me, I believed Lhasa was like that. But when I arrived in Lhasa, I was met with this urban density. It was so much building done that the first day in Lhasa, I got completely lost. I thought I could walk around in the city and always see Potala, you know, as a sign of where I was. But no, that was not possible. So how you do planning, how you do actually take care of cultural heritage areas in a city is very important. It shouldn't be allowed to build so high around such a sacred complex as the Potala. Shigatse is, in a way, even worse example, because you see on the hill there was a huge palace looking a bit like the Bhutanese forts. In Shigatse you also had Tashi-Lhompo monastery, a huge, in Tibet the tradition were a bit different from Bhutan. You had the huge monastery, and then you had the more palace-like buildings on the top. Then the Cultural Revolution came when the Chinese takeover had taken place. And during then the 1960s, the whole palace on the top was demolished. And what we see, when I was there in 96, was the ruins, as you see in the middle photograph. And what is that building below? You can wonder. That was a kind of a town hall of Shigatse. So you can maybe say that was today's palace or something. And when I was this guest researcher at Tibetan Academy of Social Sciences, I was very lucky to get a Tibetan woman as my guide. And I leaned out of our hotel window to take a picture of that building, and she said, "How can you take photo of such an ugly building?" And I said, well, I wanted to have the comparison. Whether it's ugly or not is, of course, a question. It's very modern. Then to Samye Monastery. Yeah, I must tell you that when I went to Tibet in 96, my Bhutanese friends came to my house and gave me scarves and offerings to give in the sacred places, Jokang and Samye. And I was asked to bring soil back from Samye. So my empty film boxes, an architect, we take a lot of pictures. I filled all my empty film boxes with soil and wrote Samye, Jokang, and when I came home, my friends even said, "Oh, now you can cut up your shoes because you have been in such," and that could be relics because you have been in such sacred places. So I mean, Samye, there has been hostilities between Bhutan and Tibet, yes, but most low. But Tibet was, of course, a place of pilgrimage for the Bhutanese through history. But again, the top photo is from early, like 1903, I think, where you see the monastery with all its sacred roofs. Actually, the most sacred part of also, I mean, Tibet is known for its flat roofs, but the most sacred parts of buildings, they have roofs, and often golden roofs. And what happened during the Cultural Revolution? They chopped the roof off the building, and even they chopped the head off the main Buddha sculpture in Samye. When I came in 96, then I took that last picture, and it had been reconstructed quite much as it used to be. But they had problems with that sculpture, the Buddha, how actually to repair a Buddha. And what happened then was that they found an eminent Bhutanese sculptor who came to Tibet and worked on the Buddha sculpture in Samye. So head and roofs are the most sacred parts. So in 96 they were back. But like being a woman, in temples you have the gangkangs where you store armory and so on, and women are not allowed to enter a gangkang. It's sacrilege for the sense of strength, I think. But then in Samya, I suddenly found myself inside the gangkang, and I was quite shocked and thinking, well, I shouldn't be here. And then there was someone looking like a monk, but I'm not sure he really was a monk, because he said to me, well, you can pay and you can take pictures, no problem, you know. So I felt that was very special, pay and click. I actually didn't do it. I felt it was sacrilege myself. Then is another Tibetan example, because I also was in Yarlung, where Jambu Lakar were the power place of the early Yarlung kings. And the early Yarlung kings were very powerful. They were so powerful that they even conquered the Chinese capital at some stage. So I don't know if it was a kind of revenge, because, well, the photo to the left, I actually took from the wall in the Tibet Museum last summer. And it doesn't say when it's made, but looking at sources, I think it may have been done by Hugh Richardson in 1936. And you see what a powerful building complex this is. And then to the left, you see what I visited in 1996. And what I find very amazingly is that they have actually rebuilt the tower 1 story smaller than the original. So it's like the Chinese is sort of trying to pull down the power, the strength of the old Yarlung kings. In Bhutan, that would never happen, a thing like that. This is Punakat song, the most important song in Bhutan, built from 1630 onwards, actually earlier than Potala, which is started building about 10 years later. And Le Palace in Ladakh is actually even built 10 years earlier. So this kind of building started really early on. And Punakat Song, the site for Punakat Song was also chosen due to its sacredness. It's by the confluence of 2 rivers, the Mochu and the Pochu, the Mother River and the Father River. And behind the confluence, there is a hilltop which looks like a sleeping elephant. And it was found to be very sacred. And they built a song here. And the reason why I studied the songs in my PhD was not because I was very interested in fortresses, I must admit. Fortresses are interesting, but that was not my main aim. But maybe because they were fortresses, the British were eager enough to underline their big empire. So when they came on missions to Bhutan, they made drawings of the songs. So I have drawings from as early, the top drawing is from 1783 by a draftsman called Seven. That was the photography of those days, was to actually be a military draftsman, to be clever at drawing. And is actually very accurate from a building point of view. Then in 1905, it was John Claude White, another British, who took this photograph. And the last one was me when we were living there, possibly in 96, 97, because they were actually rebuilding the song. And if you see these steps, it's sort of becoming bigger for every step it's taken. They rebuild and they use very much the traditional architecture. And in this architecture, it's interesting because I believe you may be familiar with the term entablature, that it's the amount of levels where you see here. These levels here is called the entablature, like in the Potala, which is sort of the most important in the Tibetan architecture. You find 19 layers in the entablature. And what I actually also found out was that reading about architectural history is that if you go back to the Greeks and then before Christ, the first temples in the world documented, they were built in timber. And then this tradition of building in timber and also the sacred buildings in timber, they thought that this was so important to maintain when they started to build the temples in stone. So they converted the wooden temple architecture also into stone. And that's also what you see in Bhutan today in the lower picture, because now they start to do in concrete and plaster. They are magic with the plaster in making the lotuses and the kachins and these things. So it's actually happened again. And another important thing with this is that I think, again, that in this part of the world, we see traces also of ancient architecture globally, which makes it even more interesting and important to study. Just the conclusion of my thesis is that, of course, the traditional architecture, it is not static. There has been continuous processes of change. But in Bhutan, there has been a continuity in the typological patterns. But what has really varied through history is the rate of change. Because today, the rate of change is so rapidly that you can maybe talk about it's not a transition, but it's what's the next step? What would yeah, you understand what I mean, that it's really, they break the rules of the traditional architecture. So in my country, traditional architecture has also been very much studied, and what they found there is that extensive changes took place in period when people were having a good economy. And I mean, that's maybe what we are seeing today also, because big changes are taking place. But in order to keep traditions alive, you need living traditional crafts. And here you see Mr. Wangchuk in Bomtang in 1994. He really knew his trade. And, to become a carpenter in the traditional society, you just learn to build, just like you walk to talk. It was an intuitive learning. You learned, you knew what you were doing without learning a grammar or anything. Building was somebody which most people knew quite a bit about building, but of course the carpenters, they were the arch architects in a way, also the best carpenters. But it's very important to keep the crafts alive. And here you see also to build somebody's house is a communal undertaking. People in a village, people help each other when it comes to the building. Women do the ramming of the earth, and the carpenters look very proud here by their erection of a door, and that's also something to be consecrated. But again, like we have seen here yesterday, we looked at some of the things taking place in Sanskar also. When they were rebuilding Punakatsong, they also tried to insert a concrete slab. That didn't work very well. So they had to redo the whole thing and didn't use concrete then. Because when you change a traditional structure, it's always best to use the technique you had from before, and as much as possible the same type of materials. But then, of course, the traditional architecture requires quite much maintenance. That's not something people like today. Maintenance, they wanted things to be maintenance free, but that's a myth. Nothing is really maintenance free. If you have a plastic window, it looks awful after some years and you have to change it completely. So, but here you see people who are doing their annual merit actually to repaint Chendebichon, Chorten in Bhutan, and that's done every year. And of course, they are also gaining merit from doing a thing like that. So now we are going to Sanskar, where we see Stankong's father weaving in the most fantastic landscape. And I think it's very important that we do this work we do right now, because as you know, Sanskar has been a pretty closed valley for a long, until now. Now new roads are opening up and big changes are starting to take place. So it's a crucial moment for documentation, what is there before the big changes take place. And we see a picture from Dobji Nunnery, Anigumpa, to the left. You know, recruitment of young monks and nuns are important. We want recruitment to go on, and then also there must be proper buildings for the monks and nuns to live in. So actually what Tenzin here is talking, we need to talk with the monks and what are their needs, what are the changes, while we are documenting the buildings, like here in Barden, which is interesting. It's again the Drukpa Kagyupa lineage who's been in Barden. It looks very much like the Bhutanese songs. But this picture to the left was taken by the scholar Michael Harris in as early as 76. And it's been very well documented now by the Nyandak team. And the drawings are just becoming nicer and more detailed. And we are going back on Saturday, and things will be even more detailed and more accurate. And here is Puktal, which is such an impressive place, a huge cave, which where the monastery has been built. But there they also have some problems, because they have built a concrete structure in there, inside the cave, and they have built it in concrete. And actually, the natural water source has stopped. And they are afraid that this concrete building has maybe contributed to that. A stone has also fallen down from the roof and done some damages. And this may be the result of climate change also, that it's raining more and things are changing. So it's really crucial that we talk with the monks, do this documentation, and find out what is required. Then it's Chukchiksal, old Dukang, which has this very impressive Chenresig, 11-armed. And but again, you see in the roof, there are seepages of rain. They've just put some plastic on the top. They need a better roof. And they have actually, as you see, the lines in the registration drawings here, where they are shown where there are cracks, where there are rain seeping in. So, I mean, we are really documenting what needs to be done in these places. And then Dojitsong Nunnery is here. And high up, very beautiful. Tangkong and Dechin doing the registrations in the old Dukang. And if you see that upper picture to the right, you see that the electricity supply, electricity supply seem a bit erratic many places. But I'm thinking that this is actually also a fire hazard. So things could definitely be improved with things like that. And Kasha, it's such a huge, impressive monastic establishment, but they suffered from a severe earthquake last year, and big cracks have developed in the walls. So this is being registered. Something needs to be done. Okay. And Sani built the only one on a flat ground, very much again a mandala pattern. And if you see up on the left, it's a drawing from about 1850 showing that how it has looked. The Kaniskastorten may be one of the eldest structures in all Sanskar. And then we see John Harrison being very proud of his drawing, which is really good. So, and Stonde is documented, and here you also see a photograph towards the village in front. And I think then to actually study how the village and the monasteries are working together, how the people in the monastery, what do the monastery mean for the people, what are the rituals they are carrying out. And this village has also been very well studied through history, so there are lots of documentation. And then Mune, very much new things, but very surprising was that we took timber samples out of these temples, and one sample came out from being 700 BC. So one thing is we must check if that's actually correct. But what has been there before is, of course, a big question. Then we added one more. Can you help me with the name? Songkul. So Songkul will be registered when we go now. And just a very few words why this is a very strange drawing doing by a Czech draftsman, because in the West we have something called modernism in architecture. And in modernism, they sort of just do quite much like the Chinese, actually. They are not really interested in the history. You have the history here, and then this bridge going up the river, which a bridge never does. And here you have the new, and it's actually very new and ugly, and from a sacred point of view, one would say it's inauspicious to build ugly buildings. So modernism has actually broken this historical legacy I have spoken about, which we find in Bhutan and also in Sanskar, I think. I think there are many similarities by Sanskar being well maintained through history. So, but really, that's why I also felt that these 10 years in Bhutan was so important, because I learned so much about the traditional architecture. In Bhutan, they have building rules saying that new architecture should look like traditional architecture. And I was sort of educated that the new was the great thing. So I learned a lot during those 10 years. I sat down on building sites, making notes, etc. By asking, why are you doing like this? What does this mean? So this is very, really important to do that. I just very quick say that this modern building is sort of very much based in what one may call a materials sustainability, that it's perfect products, efficient, maintenance-free, as I said. While if you think more of sustainability, which is an overused term very much, you need to actually work with processes. Things are never perfect. They are impermanent. And maintenance is necessary, and it has an environmental and a social value. And this is also a way to say that if you think about cultural sustainability, it's like telling these people working with the new, which should just be modern and economical and as simple built as possible. I want to give you a gift. This is a treasure. This is a diamond. We need to do it properly. And I have, like very many, I contributed to a new encyclopedia of vernacular architecture of the world, which are documented globally, all kind of traditions. So hopefully that is also important in order to convey to the future the importance of the vernacular knowledge. And this sentence, I think, is very, because this has a value for people, but it has a value for the society at all to maintain the traditions. So nothing is static, everything is evolving, but we have to bring a mix of culture and tradition and also something new into the future. In my country, we have about 10,000 years old stave churches built in wood, which stands today. But people start to be a bit, they don't really understand what this is all about. So if you are not thinking about the planning around these old churches, it may be that people one day, they just sit in a car driving past saying, ha, what a stupid place to build a church. So my last picture is a traffic light from Thimphu. And I think that this is a symbol of how actually the old and the new, you get new functions all the time, how to incorporate the new and the old in a good way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amundsen. Our next speaker will be Dr. John Harrison, who has spent over 30 years immersed in the conservation of Tibetan and Himalayan architecture. His work spans Ladakh, Lhasa, Mustang, including field documentation and restoration of key Ladakhi sites such as the Lamo Center and Drikung Kagyu monasteries. He has authored books such as A Blessing for the Land and Mustang Building, and currently serves as an honorary research fellow at the University of Liverpool. Today, he will share lessons from decades of work in conservation in remote and richly layered landscapes.
It's working? Yes. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you to the library for inviting us, and to all colleagues in Studio Nyandak and all the visitors. Well, in case I need it, okay. I've been at it for quite a while now. I first came to the Himalaya in 1985 in a circumambulation of the globe, and fell in love with the mountains, and then tried to find ways of getting back here to work. The Kalasha in the top left was a beautiful society of pagan believers surrounded by Islam, and that's where I started documenting vernacular architecture. But my principal interest was Tibetan architecture, and first of all in Mustang and Ladakh, in the ethnic Tibetan areas along the Himalayan chain, And then finally in 1995, I got to Lhasa itself, working with the French NGO, the Chalou Association, reporting on their repair works to quite a number of historic buildings, temples and palace around Tibet. Then I met up with Andre Alexander, who had established Tibet Heritage Fund and had managed to get an agreement with the Lhasa government to start restoration work. He'd been there since the riots in... Hey up, what's happened? Oh, it's okay. In 1987, and gradually got very good contacts in Lhasa and got together a working team, finding old craftsmen and persuading them out of retirement and building up quite a large workforce in the end. And I joined them in Lhasa in 1998, first of all. This is looking at the Potala from the roof of Ramache temple. THF had done quite a lot of documentation, map making, using existing map sources and their own researches, and also working with a Norwegian university team to start with. And here they were mapping the rapid extension of the city. This was 1980. And then by 1998, this huge increase of the built-up area with Han Chinese migration into Tibet. This will show it. No. Although most of the area out to the west is Chinese, but quite a lot of Tibetan suburban development to the north, towards Sera. This was the sort of Chinese commercial development which was happening there, although I believe this particular building has now been demolished and replaced by an even newer structure. This is from the roof of the Jokang, looking north to the PSB Tower, Public Security Police, overlooking the old city centre. The Potala reflected in reflected glass and tourism picking up enormously, even then when I was there in 98 to 2000. And the Potala just as a backdrop for, now of course it's all selfies, but there you had a photographer waiting ready with the costumes for Chinese tourists to wear. Mostly THF were working, Tibet Heritage Fund, THF were working in this area around the Jokang, the Barkor circumambulation route immediately surrounding the Jokang, and then these wider roads which had been cut through, defining this square area. Ramache outside it to the north. And this was also, this map documenting the surviving historic buildings which Peter Aufschneider had mapped when he was there with Heinrich Harrer in the 1940s. This is the front of the the Potala with pilgrims from all over Tibet and Kham circumambulating and going inside the temple. We did quite a lot of documentation of all the streets and produced a little book, which is in my bag, of all the street facades within the Barkor area. So this was on the south side of the Jokang temple. So mostly we're working here inside the Barkor, where a lot of old buildings had survived, and I was training 3 Tibetan artists in surveying measured surveys of building, and this was a compilation I made of all our floor plans covering the whole of the area inside the Barkor surrounding the Jokang temple. The Meru Ningba monastery, just immediately to the east of the Jokang, had survived as a building in the Cultural Revolution, used as stables, and the monks' quarters surrounding the courtyard converted into very poor quality accommodation for local people. This was the front of Meru Ningba, which is mostly 19th, 20th century, but a much earlier foundation and a very early temple within the complex, with connections to it's the city base of the Nechung oracle. So we were studying the construction here, parapet and the roof, the entrance, portico, quite a lot of internal structural work and roof and parapet reconstruction. And then a splendid ceremony to reconsecrate the complex with Nechung monks and a fire ritual. But while that was going on, the city was busy demolishing outside the Barkor area in what they classed as a slum clearance program, i.e. any old building. And they were rebuilding these 4-story blocks for public housing. Each of these blocks had 1 water point and 1 toilet at the end of the block. This was one of the houses outside, which was actually demolished while we were drawing it. So that all disappeared. So inside the Barkor, THF worked on quite a number of houses as well as Meru Ningba. Meru Ningba, you can see it immediately to the right of the rear of the Jokang temple. So quite narrow streets, 2- and 3-story houses, some of which had been rich merchants' houses in the past, but most of them subdivided into very poor quality apartments with no water, drainage, facilities at all. This was street elevation of the first building work I got involved in, as well as documentation, Rongda House, which had been a rich merchant's house, but there were many families crammed into it when we were working. This was the sketch of the courtyard. quite a lot of structural work, jacking up subsiding pillars where bottoms had rotted away, rebuilding the courtyard accommodation, all in traditional methods and materials. The Aga ladies singing and dancing as they beat the Aga flat for the flat roofs, a process which takes about 2 weeks. I understand some of the songs are extremely rude, but I didn't get... and then oiling the Aga and polishing it with a round stone in this case. New carpentry, windows and doors, and then the completed courtyard elevation when we'd finished. This was another house, Gampochar, just behind the Jokang, where we again did a complete restoration of the interior of the building and installing water supply, as well as a lot of new woodwork. The electricity supply was rather uncertain, so a lot of the work was done with traditional hand tools. And Andre had found a lot of craftsmen who were very happy to come back and work with THF on these traditional buildings. Power tools did come in useful for mixing tea here. And there were constant meetings with the workforce and with the residents of the buildings we were renovating on site. We also worked outside Lhasa. This was Lo Talong, well south of Yandrok, where you can see in the centre a traditional pitched roof. This is the courtyard of Talong, and we measured the building, a section, very fine paintings and rich sculpture in the cellar of the building. But above the cellar, at the left-hand side, there had been an upper chapel which had been removed, I think, during the Cultural Revolution. And so we looked at replacing that. And with a carpenter, I went to inspect roofs being reconstructed at Drepung and worked out this structure for rebuilding the missing chapel. There was some problem with the local government, as it seemed that not all the correct approvals had been sought, and there was a threat at one time to demolish it, but I think it did survive in the end. Another site outside was Sangyodrak, which is 30 kilometers down the Kichu River below Lhasa, a nunnery which had grown up around a famous Padmasambhava meditation cave, one of the many in the Himalayas. Matthew Ackister, in fact, made the connection with THF when he heard they were going to, hoping to rebuild a demolished Churton. So this was the site of the Churton there. An elderly master builder, Tenzin, was brought in, who'd studied stupas with Akam Rinpoche and had built quite a lot around central Tibet. So here he's consulting the manuals for an auspicious day to start construction. And this is his drawing from the written descriptions in the Tibetan manuals of how to build a stupa with our metric dimension conversions. Monks came in to initiate the proceedings and to bless all the collected contents which were to go inside the monastery. Here, the axis, a juniper tree, which the nuns had felled locally, is prepared for installation in the stupa. Then it's erected. Then the holy books and all the statues and tsatars are placed inside the stupa, and then it was sealed up and blessed and back in operation. And that was in 2000. 2002, I was back there shortly to do some more temple documentation for Andre, because in 2000, THF and all other foreign NGOs were thrown out of Tibet. And that's when our work there finished. And this is on the road out, leaving Tibet in 2002, the last time I saw it, heading to the north of the Himalaya and down the Friendship Highway back into Nepal. I'd started working in Mustang on the northern border of Nepal in 1993, before I ever got to Tibet itself. But it's another ethnic Tibetan area, which is the headwaters of the Kali Gandaki River, which flows on down into the Ganges. And it's this strange bump on the border where a bit of Nepal edges into Tibet. This is the Kali Gandaki as it passes between Dhaulagiri on the left and Annapurna on the right, and quite heavily forested and getting the monsoon rains here. But up in the north, it's a high mountain desert. There we're looking north towards the Tibetan border. So a lot of superb architecture surviving there, which hadn't survived in Tibet itself. Fortified settlements, rammed earth multi-story buildings here, Tetang. This was a drawing showing all the typical features of the local architecture: rammed earth walls and flat earth roofs, of course. This was a big house in Marfa of a salt trader, which had survived even when the family moved out. And this was the courtyard in operation for a new baby's celebration. But I was documenting all sorts of things: horizontal water mills, a village gateway with wind-operated prayer wheels, very rich carving in the interiors. This is in Kagbeni, and managed several visits to Loma Natang itself, which was in the restricted area in the north, which just opened up as our project, German research project, started. and I made this drawing after visit in 2005 when I was able to measure inside the palace in the centre and the Jampa Lakang at the right, and then the rammed earth walls at each side surrounding this 15th century settlement. Also religious buildings as well as secular vernacular architecture. This is Gompagang, built in the 1690s. Tubsan Lakang, one of the two big temples in Lomantang itself, which had been the royal capital of Mustang. So completely Tibetan architecture, and probably designed and built by Tibetan architects who would be traveling around all the Tibetan cultural area. Another temple, Logakar, which I hurriedly drew in 1996, but has now been restored. I was there in 2022 with funding from the US Embassy in Kathmandu, who suddenly decided to get interested in these Tibetan areas near the Chinese border. At the same time as a huge Chinese entry post was built on the border. So a lot of Chinese tourists are expected. Other areas, Langtang to the north of Kathmandu, with more rainfall there. It's just south of the highest mountain, so a pitched roof there, and that building is probably gone in the serious 2015 earthquake. So the various areas along the border I have been involved in. Langtang I've just mentioned, number 5, 3 is Mustang, and number 1 is Limi. Why does that jump? No. Oh dear. What have I done? How do I get rid of that? Thank you. Now, in 2008, I was very fortunate to join Chetsang Rinpoche, the head of the Drigung Kagyu, on a visit to Limi in the far northwest corner of Nepal, which is much closer relations with Western Tibet than it has with Kathmandu, even now. And it was to look at a number of early Drigun sites and also Guru Rinpoche pilgrimage sites and document them with a view to him putting in some funding. But there was a lot of inter-village disputes, it turned out, and in the end he gave up and didn't fund anything. But that was on the roof of one of the monasteries with Chetsang Rinpoche there. But I did manage to draw Halji Monastery, the plans with the oldest parts of the building at the top left, and the monks' quarters around the courtyard. Yeah, and a section through the building, but with a superb Vairocana four-sided statue from the 11th century. There must have been wall paintings, but nothing survives. A number of seated statues of the same period are around the room, but this central figure is superb. Then, sort of Nepal, various parts of Nepal, and then Ladakh, up at the top left. And maybe at the moment we're just sitting a bit north of the H of Himachal Pradesh on the map. The first, I started working in Ladakh properly the end of the 90s to beginning of the 2000s with a restoration of a little temple in Kanji, which is at that time was an 8-hour drive along National Highway #1, which was all potholes and dirt at that time, and then a 4-mile walk up a valley to this little village, which is in the middle there, a tiny oasis. And that's the village with the little temple at the left-hand side. Achi Association had been set up in '98, I think, first of all, by a Zurich financier who was a student of Chetsang Rinpoche. And Chetsang Rinpoche as head of the Drigung, and Togden Rinpoche, the Ladakh Rinpoche, gave us a list of possible proper early temples to work on, avoiding the ones which were already being or not being restored by the Archaeological Survey of India. And Kanji was one of these, which is a little 14th century place, but in rather a bad structural state. Splendid wall paintings and these 3 figures, all contemporary work. So rituals to deconsecrate the building before we could start. Re-roofing work with a sketching framework around the top of the walls in an attempt to stop any outward movement, because there had been settlement, and we restored all the foundations. This was Midsummer Day, 2002, when it snowed. It is about 4,000 meters high, the Kanji village. And then that was the completed building when we had replaced a missing upper roof to give added protection to the wall paintings inside. Wanla, we rebuilt the shelter for the 8 churtans here, the stone steps, a new monk's house in the centre, and a new lamp house at the right-hand side, so that the butter lamps could be taken out of the 3-story temple, which is thought to be a copy of the temple in Alchi, but maybe 100 years later. Then Skorbachan, which is about 120 kilometers down the Indus River from Leh. And this Skorbachan Car, which you see is the white building in the center, which had been an early ruler's house, and then there was a large rammed earth tower built, and then various bits and pieces added, and it's converted to a temple with a huge 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara inside. So I did this survey drawing back in 2000, but it wasn't until 2012 that we started work on it. This entrance from a later addition had been badly built in round river boulders and had partially collapsed, and we had to do some more demolition before we could rebuild. And then this was, as it was completed, the village is still great support, financial and labour from the villagers. They were very keen to get this job done, but they still haven't decided with the local monastery what it's going to be used for. Then Leh, with the Royal Palace, early 17th century. And the more important buildings of the city around the temple. And I suggested to THF, this was in after we'd been thrown out of Lhasa, that Leh town could perhaps be a suitable case for THF treatment, and Andre decided to move in, and THF have now done more than 40 house improvement projects in the old town. This was one of the first ones. And including paving and street drainage works, a gateway curtain improvement, and the house on the right, all done by THF. And at the same time, I started work on the Lompo house, which is in the centre here with a big hole in the front, which was noticing this when I was in Leh buying materials for the Kanji temple project. I noticed this large collapse and found there'd been a fire as well. It was owned by Chemri Monastery, and Chemri monks working in Leh town were housed there, but they'd had to move out. This a section through the house with a large curtain behind, and at the right-hand side, a small temple which THF worked on while I was working on the house. So quite a lot of reconstruction required, and a lot of new roofing timbers and new roofs. Then that was as it was completed about 2003, 2004. And below to the right is the Munshi house, which was the next project I worked on. This was the front elevation with splendidly decorated timber balconies. It had gradually been built over several hundred years. The earliest parts below were probably contemporary with the Royal Palace. But this frontage we see is 19th century, which had been gradually built out and over a footpath and over earlier structures, and the connections between the two were rather inadequate. And at the left is another house which was completely ruinous and which we then brought into the project. So that was about 2010 when the project was completed as the Ladakh Arts and Media Organization Centre, LAMO, which had been set up by an Indian anthropologist who had done her studies in Ladakh and stayed involved and is still involved, Monish Ahmed. Right. So this was the completed south elevation looking out over the town, with at the top a completely new library building built up from old foundations of an earlier house, and at the left the ruined Giao house built and incorporated in the project. This is the internal courtyard with the library up at the top, the churkang at the left, the central courtyard with the roof light down into the winter kitchen below. So this is now art gallery accommodation, audio-visual, big library, which is building up its collection all the time, for anybody who's interested, really, local students, artists, visiting artists from India have workshops here, and it's been a very successful community project, and that's looking down on it from the palace above, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harrison, and we'll invite Dr. Amundsen back up and do a 20-minute Q&A with the audience. And we'll maybe pass it back. If anyone has questions, we'll come around to you.
Was everything so clear? Maybe I can say something. Trying to get some discussion going here. Because my experience from Bhutan was that the monk body were actually those who were most eager in maintaining the traditions, also in architecture, while here, in Ladakh, my impression is that the monks are much more open to do lots of new things. So the monasteries are a big mix, actually, of different types of architecture. So maybe I can ask you if you have some comments to that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Manikumar Grong. I'm from Bhutan, and I would like to thank today's presenters. I feel very fortunate, and I feel like it's like my karma to be able to come and have your session, because especially being a Bhutanese youth, I think at times we don't see that way our fortresses, zone, and the preservation that has been done by the people like you, and even from the Bhutan itself. I think at times we fail to appreciate their effort, and so I think at times it's really wonderful to have session like this, because I think sometimes being ourselves, living in the place, we take things for granted and we fail to appreciate. So it was really a great insight. And in connection with this, I wanted to ask question like, for instance, Zong, especially in Bhutan, Zong fortresses, it has a function, and in today's time, it's functioning as an administrative building. So, and like you said, since now the function is changing, and also we are thinking of the accessibility, even for the people with disability and all. And also I think we also want to incorporate digital and modern things that can enhance our services, maybe like elevator and all. But in the process, I think, will we lose the sacredness of the place? Because I think for us, it's also important that the building not just function, it's not just preserved in a physical way, but also the sacredness is continued. But if we if we have a confluence of modernity, will it devalue the sacredness of fortresses? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your comment. I appreciate that very much. I learned so much in Bhutan, so it was a two-way learning process, I think. I don't think the sacredness will vanish that quickly, but I think that all these societies are in the danger of the sacredness disappearing, because we are in Bhutan. They talked about that we were in the aeon, in a declining aeon, they used to say. So the fact that things are actually maybe getting a bit down, how far, I don't know, nobody knows, but we can all work to avoid that happens. And I think that this challenge on how to achieve combining the new with the old is something you have to, as an architect at least, you have to do it from task to task. What is the right thing to do? So I'm not saying that a pretty modern building may be unsacred. I'm sure it can be sacred, that too, if it's done with a good intention and built well. So I don't think there is any other. You want to say?
Well, but in the other areas I worked in, Ladakh and Mustang particularly, there is this separation between the rulers' palaces, as we saw with the royal palace in Leh in Ladakh, and the temples. They're not combined in one building, and so that can. When the administrative functions changed, when the royal family in Leh's moved across the river, when the Dogras invaded, you've got this huge building with a nice temple inside it, but largely a secular building with no function whatsoever. In that particular case, the Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI, has been restoring, rebuilding collapsed portions. But there's the question of what on earth to do with this huge amount of accommodation. They've got some exhibition space, but it's still a big question. With smaller buildings like the Munchie House, which I was involved with Lamo, it's rather easier. And there we were able to adapt, put in new services, and try to prove that a historic structure can function in the 21st century. And provide good accommodation. That was one of the main reasons we were going into it, really, and taking an old building in the old town rather than building a new structure outside for the NGO to operate in. So it varies from case to case. Sometimes with something like Lamo, you're lucky and it can work out well.
You have some. Any more questions? Yeah. Oh, now they're coming, you know.
Hello, are we there? Yeah. I'd like to congratulate both of you for amazing work that has been done, because we know, some of us who are stuck in it, it's a lifetime's work. You know, you don't, so I'm just going to make some comments on it, because I've been 55 years in it, some of you for less. You can't leave it. Once you enter the Tibetan world, it's for a lifetime. And to stop work on it also doesn't exist. One does different bits of it depending on one's capacity, depending on one's funding. So I would like to congratulate you both on this wonderful work, because let's accept the fact that all of us who work in the Tibetan field, who are non-Tibetan, actually live in a bubble. It's a bubble floating through the modern civilization, which is a civilization of knowledge, but not sacredness. And those of us who value sacredness as a feature of our lives, as a feature of our work, actually take shelter in the Tibetan civilization. Because this was a civilization where the sacred and the non-sacred were integrated. We never made a distinction. If you stood a pillar up or if you started a building, it never occurred to you that you were moving from your normal life into a sacred life. The fact that the European Enlightenment jettisoned the part of sacredness in our lives and adopted a more materialistic, scientific basis of living, left those of us who felt the role of sacred in our lives, left them behind actually. So we go into the past, in fact, to restore our belief in the fact that the sacred is important and that the existence of the Tibetan civilization and its thriving outside Tibetan mainland is also a mark of the fact that we see them, even today's Tibetans, people who still lead lives in which the sacred is important. So I think the dropping of faith and our search for it has enormous importance. But it's a bubble importance. It does not affect modern civilization. It's not going to affect modern civilization. In India, we call it the Kali Yuga. It started in the 15th century with the genocides, and it continues. So we are away from it. We are isolated away from it. Which is why I think that the work you do, because you are intrepid people. You go into the past under extremely difficult living conditions. I appreciate the fact that you come from sophisticated urban civilization and you go to the most backward areas in this world just to continue your curiosity, just to search for answers to a life today which is not making sense to you the way it is proceeding. So I just wanted to put on record this great work that you are doing. I'm so familiar with it, having been to Lane in the 70s, made the first plans, restored monasteries, visited. It's a bug. Some people, when I asked the Lama Junior Guru once, I was involved in the library, getting the library constructed. So I just, out of plain curiosity, asked him, why am I chasing this Tibetan dream? And he said, you know, you were once a Lama, Gelong, you didn't finish your work. So it made me think that all of us who are sitting in this bubble might have been born with some connection. Otherwise, I can't explain it. Thank you.
How much time do we have, Yomsu? Because it was many arms now asking for.
About 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you so much both for your wonderful presentations. I just had a question, actually 2 questions for Dr. Harrison. So you were talking about your work in Lhasa and in parkour, and I was interested, first of all, of just your work in general, about what are the main things that you keep in mind when you're working on your conservation work. What are the things that you are keeping just in your head? Is it more like maintenance, like, sorry if I pronounce this wrong, Dr. Amundsen was mentioning about, or is it the sacredness, or I was just wondering, what do you have like in mind when you are working on your conservation work? And secondly is more Lhasa specific. And you mentioned that in Ladakh, you were working with the Ladakh media and culture organizations, and were you working with any organizations within Lhasa as well, whether that be with government organizations or the local people? Thank you.
Well, on the last point, I was working with Tibet Heritage Fund, which was, I suppose, a German NGO set up by Westerners who got themselves involved in Tibet and Tibetan life. And they had established a working relationship with the local government in Lhasa. So for several years that went along quite well, until it didn't. And we were accused of being splittist and thrown out. But yes, for several years it did work, and and certainly the local people appreciated it, and because we were providing better quality housing. As to sort of how to approach a project, first of all, you have to study the existing building as far as possible, the actual physical building that's there, any historical records that there might be, and often there aren't, particularly with secular buildings, housing. And to feel your way into it as a place, and to imagine how it had been used originally, what surviving features of decoration there were still there, even though for what, since 1960 till the 1990s, it had been used in a different way as mass housing, really, for poorer people to be accommodated in very cramped conditions with no sanitation and so on. So we were working with the local people on improving their living conditions with water supply and public toilets in the streets, drainage, as well as the actual building work on the houses to improve those and make better apartments within these old buildings. Well, certainly, I think THF managed to do that in quite a number of cases. Well, since we left in 2000, quite a number of the old houses, which we documented, not the ones we repaired, but documented, have been demolished in the following years, with this unfortunate fixation on slum clearance, providing modern accommodation, even if it's of a very poor quality. So,
I don't think that the work I have presented has well, the sacredness is what it is or what it may be. But I think that in the heritage building, there is also a lot of knowledge, which is important for our future. In thinking about sustainability, is that in the traditional architecture, they have actually based on centuries of knowledge on how to actually manage heavy rains, snow, flooding. I mean, all this is there. They try to make the building as good as possible, choose the best material. And the problem now is, of course, that much of this knowledge is fading. And what we could also see in Bhutan was that many of these new traditionally built buildings were getting damaged very quickly because people didn't know where to find the best clay anymore and how to do the proper joints and how to do the ramming and so. So I think that some of this digging in the past for the right knowledge is a challenge, is something we can use in the future. And I think that is very important.